Good evening, everybody. My name is Juliane Campfield. I'm the director here at Deutsches Haus at NYU. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this wonderful event, the inaugural event of our fall season. And I'm taking the liberty to decide that F stands for Friday, and F stands for first event of the season, and F stands for Feiern in German, to celebrate, because we are celebrating the renovation, the reopening of Deutsches Haus, and I couldn't think of a better event to do so than this event, framing F with Carol Brown Janeway, Daniel Kehlmann, and Eric Banks. We are so delighted and honored to have them here and to speak with them about Daniel Kehlmann's wonderful new novel that just came out in translation by Carol Brown Janeway, which you should also buy if you haven't done so. Greenlight bookstores, whom we're very grateful to, are selling the book, and Daniel has indicated that he's willing to sign as many copies as you'd like to buy. So after the event, please buy books and he'll sign them. And before I introduce Eric Banks, who will moderate the event, I'd also like to thank the DAHD, the German Academic Exchange Office, for their generous support of our programs. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the German Book Office, a great partner with whom we work a lot, for their support, the Greenlight Bookstore, and of course also Pantheon Books and Josie Cals, their publicity manager, who've been extremely helpful putting this together, promoting it, and obviously this has worked since you're all here, even though it's a Friday evening, still almost part of the summer. And now I'll introduce Eric. Eric Banks is a writer and editor based in New York. He's the director of the New York Institute for the Humanities at NYU. We love working with him, and they do a fantastic job here at NYU. A Mississippi native, he graduated from Columbia College and pursued graduate studies in anthropology and linguistics at the University of Chicago. A former senior editor at Art Forum, Banks relaunched Book Forum in 2003 and served as the publication's editor-in-chief until 2008. Banks' writing has appeared in numerous publications, including Book Forum, the New York Times Book Review, the Financial Times, Slate, the Wall Street Journal, Aperture, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. He has also served as an editorial consultant in numerous catalogs and collections of artist writings, including the catalog accompanying the Whitney Museum of Art's retrospective of Jeff Koons and a collection of the writings of artist Paul Chan. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists.
Thank you, Juliana, and it's really a pleasure to be invited to moderate this conversation. It's just such a tremendous event, a celebration, a new book, new novel by Daniel Kehlmann, and we're lucky tonight to have both Daniel and Carol Brown Janeway with us tonight for a conversation that I'm hoping will really take place between the two of you, because I think you know each other's work so well at this point that I feel almost superfluous being here, but I will jump in as necessary. I want to take a second to introduce Daniel Kehlmann and Carol Brown Janeway. For those of you who don't know, Daniel Kehlmann was born in Munich in 1975 and is the son of director Michael Kehlmann and actress Dagmar Mettler. In 1981, he and his family moved to Vienna. He then studied philosophy and German studies at the University of Vienna. His first novel, Beerholm's Vorstellung, was published in 1997. Kehlmann lectured on poetry at the universities in Mainz, Wiesbaden, and Göttingen, and was honored with numerous awards, including the Candide Prize, the award of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the Doderer Prize, the Kleist Prize in 2006, and most recently the Weltliteratur Award in 2007. I don't think that's most recently, but pardon me on that. Kehlmann's reviews and essays have been published in many magazines and newspapers, such as from Der Spiegel to The Guardian to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. He's experienced international success with numerous novels, beginning with Ishin Kaminsky, and his novel Measuring the World was an international bestseller, which so far has been translated into 40 languages, one of the most successful German novels of the post-war era. The novel that we're celebrating today and discussing today, F, was published last year in Germany and Austria and was long listed for the German Book Prize. Daniel Kehlmann lives in Vienna, Berlin, and New York. Carol Brown Janeway, to my left, is the translator of F, as well as Kehlmann's other 3 novels that have been published in English. Janeway has been a leading advocate for literature and translation during her long career as Senior Vice President and Senior Editor at Alfred A. Knopf. The list of international writers she has published includes such luminaries as Patrick Susskind, Jose Donoso, Yukio Mishima, Elsa Morante, Ivan Klima, Robert Musil, and Nobel laureates Imre Kertész, Heinrich Boll, and Thomas Mann. She is the translator of seminal works by Bernhard Schlink, The Reader, Thomas Bernhard, My Prizes, Ferdinand von Schirach, Crime, Santa Maria Embers, and Daniel Kehlmann, among others. So we welcome you tonight. I'm very glad you could join us. And I'd like to begin by asking Daniel just to give us a flavor of the novel, if you want to give us a quick reading and maybe set up the passages they're going to read for us. The game plan is that we'll have conversation for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open this up to questions and answers from the audience. So prepare what you would like to ask, and we'll turn to you at the end. And in the meanwhile, if you want to go to the podium.
Good evening. I'll start with a short reading. No worries. I know readings in Germany are usually very, very, very long. That's what audiences want. I know it's not like that over here. So it's a short passage from the first chapter. Arthur Friedland, so far failed writer, and his 3 sons are going to see a hypnotist show on a sunny Sunday afternoon, and I'll read the beginning of that show. The light dimmed and the murmur of conversation died away. The curtain opened. Lindemann was standing on the stage. He was plump and had a bald spot that was made all the more noticeable by the few sparse hairs combed over the nakedness of his skull, and he was wearing black horn-rimmed glasses. His suit was gray, and there was a little green handkerchief in the breast pocket. Without preamble, without so much as a bow, he softly began to speak. Hypnosis, he said, was not the same as sleep, but rather a state of inner wakefulness, not submission, but self-empowerment. The audience would witness astonishing things today, but nobody need have cause for concern, for nobody could knowingly be hypnotized against their will, and nobody could be made to perform some act that in the depth of their soul they were not ready to perform. He then paused for a moment and smiled, as if he'd just delivered some rather abstruse joke. A narrow set of steps led down from the stage into the audience. Lindemann descended them, touched his glasses, looked around, and walked up the center aisle. Obviously, he was now deciding which people to take back up onto the stage. Ivan, Eric, and Martin lowered their heads. "Don't worry," said Arthur. "He only takes grown-ups. So maybe it'll be you. It doesn't work on me." "They were about to see something big," said Lindemann. "Anyone who didn't want to participate mustn't worry. He wouldn't come too close. The person would be excused." He reached the last row, ran back surprisingly nimbly, and jumped up onto the stage. "For starters," he said, "something light, just a joke, a little something. Everyone in the first row, please come up here." A murmur ran through the theater. "Yes," said Lindemann, "the first row, all of you, please be quick." "What does he do if someone says no?" whispered Martin. "If someone just stays in his seat, then what?" Everyone in the first row stood up. They whispered to one another and looked around unwillingly, but they obeyed and climbed up onto the stage. "Stand in line," Lindemann ordered, "and hold hands." Hesitantly, they did so. "No one was to let go of anyone else," said Lindemann as he walked along the line. "No one would want to, so no one would do it. And because no one would want to, no one would be able to. And because no one would be able to, it wouldn't be wrong to declare that everyone was literally sticking to one another." As he was talking, he reached out here and there to touch people's hands. Tight, he said. Hold hands tight, really tight. Nobody step out of line. Nobody let go. Really tight, indissoluble. Anyone who wanted to should try and see what happened now. Nobody let go. Lindemann turned to the audience and there was some timid applause. Ivan leaned forward to get a better look at the people on stage. They looked uncertain, absent-minded, somehow frozen. A little man was clenching his jaws. The hand of a lady with hair pulled into a bun was shaking as if she wanted to tear free but was finding that her neighbor's grip, just like her own, was too strong. He would count to 3, said Lindemann, then everyone's hands would let go. So 1 and 2 and he slowly lifted his hands. 3 and snapped his fingers. Uncertainly, almost unwillingly, they let go, looking at their hands in embarrassment. Now go, sit down again, quick, said Lindemann. Down, quick, quick, quick. He clapped his hands. The woman with the bun was pale and swayed as she walked. Lindemann took her gently by the elbow, led her to the steps, and spoke to her quietly. When he let go, she was more sure-footed, went down the steps and reached her seat. That had been a little experiment, said Lindemann, an opening trick. Now for something serious. He went to the front of the stage, took off his glasses and squinted with his eyes scrunched up. The gentleman in front, over there in the pullover, and the gentleman right behind him, and you, young lady, please come up. Smiling awkwardly, the trio climbed onto the stage. The woman waved at someone. Lindemann shook his head in reproof, and she stopped. He positioned himself next to the first of them, a tall, heavy-set man with a beard, and held his hand in front of the man's eyes. He spoke into his ears for a while, then suddenly called, "Sleep!" The man fell over. Lindemann caught him and laid him down on the floor. Then he stepped over to the woman next to him, and the same thing happened. And then again with the other man. They all lay there motionless. And now, be happy. He must explain, he said. Lindemann turned towards the audience, removed his horn rims, pulled the green handkerchief out of his breast pocket and began to polish them. They were all only too familiar, were they not, with the stupid suggestions that mediocre hypnotists, pretentious and untalented incompetents of the sort you encounter by the dozen in any profession, love to instill in their guinea pigs. Freezing cold or boiling heat, bodily stiffness, sensations of flying or falling, not to mention the universally beloved forgetting of your own name. He paused and stared thoughtfully into the air. It was hot in here, wasn't it? Terribly hot. So what could be going on? He mopped his brow. Such idiocies were familiar to everyone, and he would skip them without further ado. My God, was it hot! Ivan pushed his wet hair back off his forehead. The heat seemed to be rising off the floor in waves. The air was damp. Eric's face was all shiny too. Programs were flapping the air all over the audience. But something could surely be done to fix it, said Lindemann. Not to worry, the theater had capable technicians. Someone would turn on the excellent air conditioning at any moment. In fact, it already had been done. Up here you could already hear the humming of the machinery. You could feel the rush of air. He turned up his collar. But now it really was blowing terribly. The equipment was astonishingly powerful. He blew on his hands and shifted from foot to foot. It was cold in here, very cold. Really very, very cold.
I had not thought about how appropriate that passage could possibly seem on this tropical summer evening. Yes.
I was told to take the microphone.
Yes, sorry. Take the microphone. And of course, those words would not have been possible without the work of your translator, of Carol Janeway. So I was reading this wonderful speech that you gave last year when she was presented with the Friedrich Ulfers Prize, which I thought was quite a lovely portrayal of how you work together, and the fact that, as you put it, it's not something you can choose to do. It happens as a sort of election in the way that Carol works. And I wonder if you want to talk about that a little bit, about just how you've come to work with Carol on the last 4 novels, and all the novels that have been translated into English.
Well, the only thing I can say maybe to start off that topic is, as a writer, you often get asked, how do you choose your translator? And in the case of Carol, the only thing I can say to that is, I didn't, of course, she chose me. And yeah, maybe you want to say how that happened.
How did that happen?
Because I was having dinner in New York with a man I adore, who is a very close friend and a German publisher. He is the head of Rowohlt. And he started to talk about this novel that he had been absolutely blown down by. And he talked, and I listened, and it was about Humboldt and Gauss. Now, the thing he said is terribly German, but I do want you to read some of it. I, in my naivety, was still working according to old publishing time, not new publishing time. Old publishing time meant you had a conversation like that, the publisher went home, he told his secretary, the secretary did up the manuscript in a brown paper parcel. It set off from Europe by boat, and if you were lucky, 12 weeks later, the consequences of your conversation would arrive. So I was feeling, phew, basically. Imagine my horror the following morning when I open up my email in the office and there is a message with a paperclip attached. And I open it up and it is this entire novel. So I think what every responsible editor does, which is, I'll read 30 pages and that'll do it. So I take 30 pages home and I clamber into bed, because that's where I do my reading, and I think this is going to be easy. Humboldt, Gauss, new literary writer. I love Alexander, I'll find something to say. And I read 30 pages and I think, So I go back in the following morning and I shovel the next 40 pages into my bag for that evening. And I take it home and I clamber into bed and I read the next 40 pages and I think, shit. And I take a large chunk of it home and I'm still reading. And the way I read is that at least it sorts itself out. I read, I chuck. I read, I chuck. So that there are pieces of paper scattered all around my bed, but at least it keeps things clear. And on it goes, and on it goes. And I realize I am going to have to try to buy this book. So I take a deep breath and I go into the office and I go to see the head of Pantheon, which is within the Knopf Group. And I say, bear with me. You're going to have to listen to this because I've been reading this amazing thing. It's about Humboldt and Gauss. I love Humboldt, says the head of Pantheon. So I think, okay, terrific. So I then go to Vintage, which is our trade paperback line. And I say, Marty, you're going to have to bear with me. I know it sounds unlikely. I have this German novel about Humboldt and Gauss. I'm obsessed with Gauss, says the head of Vintage. So I take a deep breath and I go and see Sunny Mehta, who is the head of it all and who has one of the most famously grumpy temperaments in all of publishing. But Sunny and I have known each other since I was 18. We were at university together, which makes things a little simpler. And I say, Sunny, you don't want to know. I have this German novel. It's about Humboldt and Gauss. Give me the money. And Sunny, to get rid of me, says, fine. And that is how I bought Measuring the World. And this was a kind of writing. This was a kind of use of the German language I had not seen. I mean, there isn't a prior example. German fiction was fighting its way out, of course, of the long consequences of Group 47 and the aftermath of World War II and all the issues that had to be fought out. And here was this kid, forgive me, Daniel, who was just free. He was off and he was going. And the sense of sheer pleasure and fun was electrifying to me, absolutely electrifying. And I translate one book a year for fun. I only translate books that I'm going to publish myself. I don't translate for any other publisher. And I thought, you know, I'm going to do this book. There's only one problem. Having had a Scottish education, it meant that at the age of 13, because I was rather young for my class, specialist divisions opened up in school. And with an absolute joy in my heart, I had my last science lesson ever. And off I went into languages and history and all these other things. So I speak to the German publisher, and then I write this very nervous letter to the author saying, I would love to do this, but there's only one problem, which is the scientific aspect in this, because can you cope? Because I don't have a clue. And the thing about the relationship between a translator and an author is it is like that old French saying in reverse, no man is a hero to his valet. No translator is a hero or heroine to the author. You can't fake it. You can fake to the outside world. You cannot, between translator and author, fake it. If you can't figure it out, if you're stuck, you have to say so. And Daniel thought that we would basically get through it. And so off we went. And there was a certain point when I was staring at a passage in this novel, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it, and I couldn't get it. And luckily, the head of Pantheon has a passion for science. And I sent an email to Daniel, I'll never forget it, and I went to Dan Frank. I said, I'm really stuck. This appears to be saying that space is curved. And there was this pause, and they said, yes, Carol, space is curved. So if Daniel and I survived that, we would survive anything. And I've been translating Daniel ever since. There is an absolute joy when a new manuscript arrives, because you don't know what he's going to do next. It is going to spring fully armed from Jove's side. It will just be completely surprising and not like anything else. And if I have to explain basically the relationship between translator and author, and most certainly between me and Daniel, it's the old Ginger Rogers joke about Fred Astaire. It's, I do everything that he does, only backwards and in high heels. And that is, we've figured out how to do it. And in fact, curiously, new technology has turned out to be a wonderful thing, because Daniel is in Europe a great deal of the time. We don't spend hours talking on the phone. We do it by email, and that is the contemporary equivalent of an epistolary relationship. And that is really, really significant and important. I have his voice under my eye and in my ear all the time. I know the rhythm of Daniel's mind. And that is what makes it such a pleasure. And that's how you build on it. Very long.
That's really interesting. No, that's really fascinating. And this book is, you know, I think it's strongly related to Fame, the previous novel, in its structural experimentation, and the fact that structure plays such a pronounced, and it's very much something one has to deal with from the opening page of the novel. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how that affected the translation process, whether you approached it differently than you might have the previous novels. What was specific about translating this novel? Did it surprise you as much as the previous work?
No, is the absolutely straight answer to that, simply because my expectation with Daniel is whatever it is, it will be utterly unexpected. And so I climb into the water and I start swimming. That is what is my responsibility. That is what I do. And we, as I say, we email to and fro a great deal. And so there are translators who work in very, very different ways. I don't build up questions as I go and send them in big chunks. Way Daniel and I work, it's absolutely constant. I disappear to my house in the country on August 1 every year. And by the time I re-emerge Labor Day, I have done a translation. I work up to 18 hours a day. I do not read anything else because the one thing that matters is the author's voice in my head. I can listen to music, I can do other things. If it's a good day, I can go out into my garden. I can do other things. I cannot read. And if it's a lousy day, at midnight, I am still sitting at my table. I do not go to bed until I've done that day. But I write longhand, and my hand is on yellow legal pads in front of me at my work table, and my right hand also has my laptop on a stand, and it's going continuously. Daniel, page 5, line 13, what is this? What is that? We could do it this way, we could do it that way. It doesn't exactly work in English. May I try this? May I try that? And we have, over time, I think, built up such a relationship of trust that he is prepared to let me try things, even in a sense, almost try variations on what the German might be doing, because it will present a way of looking at something different in English. And we just go sometimes hour by hour and day by day. And then wherever Daniel is, I will go to where Daniel is, or he'll be in New York and he'll come to me, and we just sit there for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, and we edit the translation line by line by line, so that anything that goes forward is something that he has signed off on. And it's a wonderful way to work. I would dread trying to do it any other way now. And that's how we operate.
Yeah. Does that is it a really fulfilling process?
Oh yes, it is. For several reasons. The first reason is that Carol is not just a wonderful translator; she's also an editor, a very good editor. And most translators are not editors; they just take what's there for granted. Carol doesn't do that, and so in the process of translating the book into English, what you get for free is also the advice of a very good editor. So I did, and I did in all of my books in the English version, change things because Carol had advised me to do that, and it made sense. For example, if you compare the last chapter of Me and Kaminsky in German and in English, it's not like there are not different things happening in the English version, but I think it has a decisively different atmosphere in English, because I felt myself there was a little bit too much pathos, a little bit too much Hollywood, as Carol put it in the original last chapter. And so, and there were particularly 3 paragraphs which you really didn't like, and I thought you were right, and I changed one of these paragraphs and cut the two others. So it's a slightly different thing, that book. So that's one thing, that in the translation process I really take Carol's advice on a few things and make changes. Another thing is that as far as dialogue is concerned, and as far as working with humor is concerned, the English language can do a few things that the German language cannot. The German language can do a few things the English doesn't do so well when it's about philosophy and about interpretation of the pre-Socratics or whatever. But definitely the English language works better with the flow of dialogue and works better with small humorous asides. So well, maybe the Hungarian language too, but I don't know about that. So, but in English language, I can feel that that's the case, and I can feel that English works better. And so I asked Carol if she can make the flow of dialogue better, more of a flow, and if she can make a funny line funnier by using the capability for funniness that the English language has, to please do it. And I'm often very, very happy and thrilled with what she comes up with.
Do you think it's a funnier book in English than it is in German? It is actually a very, very funny book in places. And
I think it is. Yes, I think
it's
my
a dark book, but it's also
it's dark and funny. It's that's kind of the direction I'm taking as a writer. It happens. I didn't decide that, but dark and funny is where I find myself. But I think, I mean, as far as I can judge all my books, especially the ones that work with dialogue. In Measuring the World, there are some funny effects that couldn't be rendered in English because I use indirect speech in German.
This is the one thing that German does brilliantly, that you cannot avail yourself of in English, simply because English is such a loose and mongrel language. You cannot signal that you're in indirect speech by the use of the structure of verbs, which is how you do it in German. And so you find yourself putting in all these little clumsy additions like he said, he thought, or whatever. And I hate doing that because it throws off something else, which is a particular concern always with Daniel. It isn't just that you're dealing with style and thought, you're dealing with velocity. And as a translator, you have to gauge how fast Daniel is going as he goes down the page. And you can absolutely pace your translation and your English to try to replicate that. My image is of a downhill slalom, and you have to know where the gates are, and you have to know how fine you can cut it, and you have to be able to be very, very balanced in your language, but really when he needs you to, you have to move at speed. And indirect speech is, I mean, I adore working with it, but it's a frustration. English can do more flexibly almost everything else in German, but indirect speech is one place where it sticks. The other place where it sticks, I don't know if anyone has ever tried it, you cannot translate Nietzsche into English and make him sound like someone other than someone to whom you want to say, wouldn't you like to lie down for 10 minutes and take an aspirin? English pragmatism does not respond. I mean, you read these texts and you just think, really? That is one of the other sticking points that one finds between German intellectual writing and English. But Daniel's German is extremely fluid. He is much, much freer in the way that he writes than I think almost any of his contemporaries whom I know. And I think he is in fact coming more towards an English rhythm of thought, which is part of what distinguishes his prose, in fact, in the original German. But it's something that I can move towards, coming off the English angle of it. And you find a place to meet where you can pull off most of the effects that he wants.
But when you say coming towards, do you mean from novel to novel, or that it's more of something that's been fairly consistent?
It's been consistent.
Okay. Yeah.
It's been consistent. Those are across the 4 books of Daniel's that I've done. Those will be the issues that I find myself, regardless of complexities of almost musical structure that Daniel is playing with. And of course, there are connections from book to book.
Yes. Yeah.
The utterly horrific protagonist of Me and Kaminsky pops up in this novel as well, you know, and you just know that for the rest of your life, you're going to be sitting there scribbling and think, hang on, haven't we met him before? You know, back you go, and you have to find what it is he's playing with this time around. And I don't think he's going to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So.
Is that a fairly, is that something of a certainty?
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether this guy will have another cameo in a future book, but it's very possible. It's very possible. But playing with connections of things from book to book, having small characters come back, or I really like that. And in that case, with that character with Zöllner, people really asked me what became of him often. So I felt like, and also I have to say something that also moved me to do that was, well, for once that part of the novel was also set in the art world, and I had written a novel set in the art world before, so I felt like if there is a connection, I should not pretend I don't see the connection. I should, the opposite, I should do something with that connection. And then also it was fun to do that because when I wrote that chapter, they were shooting the movie version, which still isn't out even in German because they're still editing, so they're taking their time. So I went to the set and I saw the wonderful actor Daniel Brühl playing this role, and I had this, and he was so good and he was so convincing, and I had this interesting, for a writer, very interesting experience of feeling the character being pulled out of my hands by this wonderful actor. And I thought, like, soon the movie will come out and then everybody who will read the book will see his face, which is the way it should be. But then I felt it's still, that this guy still belongs to me.
Yeah. That's
and so, and I want to do with that, with the fact that no matter what they're doing in the movie, this guy still also, he belongs to them, but he also belongs to me.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice kind of feeling of ownership that comes out in Fame as well with some of the characters who protest their fate.
In a very practical way, because you can do it if you're the writer of the original book, because you feel like they have the movie people, they make this long contracts about, and nobody could actually do something with these characters, or it's all protected by laws, by walls of legal stuff. But you feel like if you're the writer of the original book, you can still do whatever you want with these characters. They cannot prevent you from doing it. They don't want to, but it felt good to certify the rights of ownership of a character.
Well, in the novel, you have 3 brothers. One is an investment banker who's a deeply he's a fraudulent figure. He's committing fraud. You have a younger brother who is a priest who has no faith and is addicted to chocolate and to turning his Rubik's Cube over and over. And then the third figure is a painter who has a sort of small amount of talent, and he becomes a forger, counterfeiter. I was thinking about the previous novel. You seem to have a very strong reaction against the art world. And I was kind of curious about that. I can understand the fraudulence immediately in the other two, but I'm just curious.
I find the art world very interesting. When I wrote Me and Kaminsky, I actually don't have such a strong reaction towards the art world, but I can see how it might seem like that. When I wrote Me and Kaminsky, I felt more like a strong aggression towards cultural journalism as a whole. And I felt I cannot make him a literary journalist. I cannot do that. It would be too close to what I do, so I felt like I have to make him an art journalist. So, but it was really, my first impulse was not that I was in any way bothered by the art world and wanted to write about it. I was bothered by cultural journalism and said, I better set this in the art world. But of course, the book has become, me and Kaminsky, a rather aggressive satire, and that's what I wanted to write. In this case,
it's not satirical in this case.
Not, no, exactly. Yeah. I didn't want to be satirical. I wanted to explore this weird gray zone of a forger doing something where you cannot quite be sure, is it forgery or is it not? What exactly is he doing? The more you read about forgery, the more you look into the history of forgery in art, a philosophy of forgery in art, it all becomes more and more blurred. It becomes more and more difficult in many cases to say this is not original, this is not art, this is forgery. It all becomes extremely complicated, and I wanted to write about this field of strange field of uncertainty, and I thought, so that means you will have to go back to write about the art world, and I thought I didn't want to just repeat myself, and in this case I really felt no anger. So I thought I wanted to be very fair in writing about this. But of course I also had to describe how somebody who invents an artist, so who invents a fraudulent artist, can create a career for that artist. And I did actually research a lot there, more than for anything I'd ever written, including Measuring the World and and science in the 19th century. I talked to a lot of artist friends. I even read books about how to price work of arts, because I really wanted to describe how a very good curator, how a art curator, which Ivan is, he's somebody who's really taking charge also of the legacy of his painter friend who died.
He controls the estate,
and he does that very well. I wanted to also to describe how do you actually control and manage an artist's estate very well. Yeah. And so I did. I tried to describe the Cine era at studio and just the way it is, including small details, like when he's meeting a collector, the way they talk to each other, the fact that the collector is Belgian. An artist friend told me most European art collectors now are Belgian because Belgians get certain tax breaks if they collect art. So I wanted to be but you see what happens.
The conceptual legacy in Belgium is...
and I was not going for that consciously. But the funny thing is, and I'm not saying that to be judgmental, it's just a fact. If you describe the art world very fair, with a lot of research, then it will look like satire.
Yeah.
Even
I know, that is...
But that was not my plan. That just happened.
Well, you have a lot of realism anchoring these texts. I mean, and I think that, the extent that I've read the German reviews of the book, people are sort of at pains to identify real world figures standing behind. I mean, Wolfgang Beltracchi, I think, is the forger who's always
it's funny.
Oh, this is and it's interesting because it does play a kind of anchor into the against this almost fairy tale setting that a lot of the book brings out. It somehow forms a kind of stoppage against that reading.
Or
it makes it more.
I consciously stayed away from the Beltracchi story, which blew up while I was writing this, but I didn't want it to come too close to the factual parts of Beltracchi. But I've met Beltracchi since. Oh, really? He's a very, very impressive guy, I have to say, and he really liked the book, so he could identify with, especially with the forger's part. But he told me one detail that really bothered him was that in the artist's studio, I was describing one of the things I was describing was the smell of the colors, and I got I got it slightly wrong. He wanted the smell to be slightly different. I was quite proud. I thought, if this is the only thing that the world's greatest master forger finds fault with, then I'm quite happy. So.
Well, you built that character as one of the most kind of ambiguous and ambivalent figures in the narrative, and I'm curious how you were thinking about him
You mean Ivan?
Yes, Ivan.
I like him a lot.
Who disappears.
I think he's one of the things, if you think about forgery in art, it's the only crime. Maybe you can come up with something else, but it's the only crime where, as long as the perpetrator is not exposed, there is absolutely no victim. Mm-hmm. It is, as long as you get away with it, a victimless crime. Think about it. The only way actually people can get harmed is if frauds get exposed. Otherwise, people buy the paintings and everybody's happy. So that being said, I wanted to be. When I wrote about, I wanted to be Ivan. I wanted Ivan to be a genuinely good person. So when when the old painter he lives with his lover, when he becomes old and sick, he stays with him to the end. He's surprised himself that he turns out to be such a good nurse, among other things. When at a certain moment on the street he sees an act of violence, he is there to help, and that turns out to be not a very good decision. Yeah. And one of the things he thinks is, this is the last thing I needed to find out that I'm a hero. So I wanted to not just to well, Eric, for example, what he does is really bad. It's also morally bad. I also try to like him. I also try to write him without being in any way felt morally repulsed myself. You cannot write about a character and not be kind of the advocate of that character while you're writing about him. But Ivan, I thought, I often had to think of something Dostoevsky said, that one of the hardest things to create in fiction is a genuinely good person. And I wanted to create a genuinely good person in Ivan, who happens to be a kind of a con man. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Without real victims. Yeah.
But also, I think, one of the things that struck me very much working on the book, in terms of Ivan, who is a fascination, you think forger, and you have a fairly standard initial set of reactions. Ivan is not a normal forger. He is not a forger for profit who is creating masterworks from an artist who is dead. The man whose work he continues to extend is his lover. The old man, the old painter, is the adult relationship of Ivan's life. So it's not the normal ripoff. It's not the normal exploitation at all. And so I think for a reader, you really have to sit down and think about that. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons that I liked Ivan so much as a character. It's a very unusual double relationship. He has his reasons for starting to create more paintings than the old painter had originally painted. But he is not simply saying, okay, I can do 3 of these in the next month, then it goes straight into the bank account. That's not what he's about at all. And I think one of the themes that goes through how Daniel sees these 3 brothers, and indeed the father, and the question of what it is, the father having been influenced by the hypnotist in ways that he himself utterly is oblivious to, and sets out to test himself and become a writer, which is what he's always played around with and never had the guts to go ahead and do. It's the relationship between authenticity and what we think of as authenticity, and the forms in which it can go wrong and get misdirected. And that's why, what does F stand for? And one of the lucky things about this novel was, thank God Daniel chose the letter F, because I found that I could take the play, you know, F is for fate, F is for fraud, F is for family, F is for all these things. Thank goodness English has, after all, large German roots. Yes. And so you could do this without having to change the entire damn alphabet as you went through. But I mean, there are all sorts of questions in this book. Can you have the devil if you don't have God? And the devil is in this book. The devil makes one very clear appearance and another slightly veiled appearance. Can you have evil if you don't have good? What is authentic? What is not? Where in the moral system do all of these things fit? Daniel is playing with some really complex questions, philosophical questions and ideas. And yet you never feel for a moment that this is what the French call a pièce à tiroir, which is basically a chest of drawers. Open this drawer and you know the themes that are going to be inside. There's nothing schematic about this at all. The questions he's posing are embodied in the characters. It's not theoretical, it's not cold, it's not abstract in any way. But there are some very complicated things going on in this book, very complicated indeed.
No, I think that's one of the things that's marvelous about the book and the translation is the fact that structure always feels like it's imminent. It never feels like you are going to open the drawer and find the answer. And I don't know how satisfied you finally are with the answers that you provide or that you don't provide, but leaving that open, which is one of the most magnificent sort of things that you leave, you know, after you've read the novel.
Yeah, I don't provide answers, not just because I don't think a novel can provide answers, not just because I don't really have them, but because in the case of this book, it was also part of my initial plan, pose questions and also even small riddles or little mysterious things that seem like they can be solved, and maybe they can be solved, but I cannot solve all of them. And some questions, also questions of the plot, like why does Arthur later in life reappear, tell his boys that he will, by then grown up, that he will meet them the next day, and then he's not there.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It was, I didn't have that in my earlier books. In my earlier books, I think most of the questions, the plot-related questions, of course, some things just stay open, but the important plot-related questions, I would always have known what happened, even if it's not in the book, or even if it's hard to find out. Here, there's much more openness in it than my other my previous novels. I think I was partly influenced by Roberto Bolaño there. I was just admiring this daring. Yeah, I don't find a better word for the openness of his books, and I wanted to try to create my own version of that.
Yeah, yeah. I have to ask, how did you arrive at the perfect sort of leitmotif of the Rubik's Cube?
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny because that came so late. One of the ways to make a character less sad, the priest, is to give something to that character which he or she really likes. That infuses a whole dimension of additional energy into a character. If there's something the character is really passionate about. And I wanted to give him something to be really passionate about, but then I thought it should be something really weird. And it should better be something weird. And then I came up with this idea that he, as a child, he just started to because it's this generation of when everybody had a Rubik's Cube as a child. So he started with the Rubik's Cube and then never got away from that. And I found the idea of a priest going to speed cubing competitions so funny that I just thought this is the funniest idea ever. And it turned out it's not that funny in the novel. It seems like a very important metaphor.
But it perfectly mirrors the structure of the
exactly.
plot,
So now it seems like
turning itself in and out around.
Exactly. So now it seems like the most important, and it kind of became a guiding metaphor for the whole book.
Yeah.
But it came in. Again, I shouldn't have told that, but it came in very, very late.
Well, do you want to read just a tiny bit from Martin's moment in the at confession, and then we'll take a few minutes of questions from you. But I think this is a great reading because it's a great passage because it also does give a sense about a relatively dark novel, how funny it can be. So.
There is a creak of wood. A figure pushes its way in and goes down on its knees. I put the cube to one side. I just completed it in 28 seconds. My best time is 19, but that was long ago. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I say crossly. Forever and ever, amen, a hoarse male voice responds. I'm listening. He's silent, breathing heavily, searching for words. I look at the cube again, but it's not okay. Twisting the rows might make a noise, and he'd notice it. Unchastity, I pleasure myself. I do it all the time. Oh, I sigh. Even just now, on the street, no one saw. I have a wife and a girlfriend. They both know about each other, but neither of them knows about my second girlfriend, although she knows about them. Then I have a third girlfriend that none of them knows about. And she doesn't know about any of them, so she thinks I live alone. I rub my eyes. I'm tired, and it is so hot. Things went wrong with Clara. Things went wrong when Clara made fun of my wife on Facebook. She didn't think of the fact that Pia's her friend and can read it. Her friend, Facebook friend. I told all of them that I'm stopping. Things are going to be different now, but it's so hard. How do you do it? No woman ever? I get shaky after just 2 hours. We're speaking about you. And besides, I've taken money. Not that much, 1,000 euros from that company cash register. What is your profession? I'm an accountant. My girlfriend works in my office. Which one? Which office? Which girlfriend? Well, Clara, the one my wife knows about. Why an accountant? Excuse me? Why would anyone be an accountant? I've always wondered. He says nothing. But why can't I ask questions? Where is it written that I'm not allowed to learn anything in a confessional? I like crossword puzzles, he says, when everything is neatly filled in. All of it is right. I like that. You look at the receipts, at first it's all pure chaos, but then you begin to fill in the answers. One thing here, another thing here, this space and that space. And at a certain point, it all comes together. In life, it's the only place you'll find order. Do you need an accountant? No, thank you. The money wasn't from a client, you mustn't think that. It was from the office supply for petty expenses. A friend of mine has a furniture business. I told him I need to buy new swivel chairs, but you need to fill out the invoice a little higher, around 3,000 euros. And then you just said 1,000. And then he delivered the chairs, and I paid, and we split the difference between us. Unfortunately, he then wanted to write off the money I got as a special expense on his tax return. And because he's our client, I had to tell him that this wasn't possible. I tried a couple of bookkeeping trips. Let's talk about the women. It's terrible, Father. They keep calling. Who? All of them, except my wife. She never calls. Why would she? And I visit one of them every day. I've got things well organized, but it takes too long. I still have to, just like before. How do you stand it, Father? I once managed for a whole week. I stayed at home, played with the children, and helped my wife in the kitchen. In the evenings, we watched funny animals on YouTube. There are so many of them. Thousands of funny animals. What do? Eat, roll around, make noises. On the third day, I thought things weren't really so bad. On the fifth, I thought I'd have to kill myself. Then I went to her. To which one? I can't remember. Is it important? No. So what should I do? Exactly that. Stay at home, help with the cooking, watch animal videos. But that's terrible. Of course that's terrible. That's life. Why are you saying such a thing to me? Because I'm not your therapist. Nor am I your friend. Look truth squarely in the face. You will never be happy. But that's not important. You can live that way. I wait for a moment, then make the sign of the cross. I absolve you of your sins in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Be true to your wife for as long as you can. Try it for 2 weeks. 2 weeks have to be possible. And give the money back. That is your penance. How do I enter it on the books? You'll find a way. But it's easy to say. How do you picture that? I can't just pay 12,000 euros back to the office. 12? I'd rather stay at home for 3 weeks. 3, yes? Give the money back. He's silent. The absolution still holds, yes? I mean, independent of the penance. It's not a condition. The sacrament is fulfilled. But not paying the money back would be a new sin. And then I'll come back. It doesn't work that way. Of course, I could do it as a tax refund, but there's an audit. What do? I can't recredit it. He waits. I don't respond. Goodbye, Father. The wood creaks. His footsteps recede. I would have liked to get a look at his face, but the sanctity of the confessional forbids it, and I stick to the rules. The Protestants have a God who wants to know what's going on in your soul, but I'm a Catholic, and my God is only interested in what I actually do. I pick up the cube, and just as I'm wondering whether to use the classic approach or start with a block on 4, the wood creaks again. I drink. I put down the cube. I drink all the time. I can't stop. I envy alcoholics. People make movies about them. The best actors star in them. Articles and novels get written about them. But people who eat a lot, thin people say it's all a question of willpower, but maybe they're just thin because they're less hungry. Earlier, I bought 2 chocolate bars from the machine on the corner, not to eat, just to have on hand. What a stupid idea. It's all I want anymore, just drink. My wife's left me, I lost my job, nothing matters. I just want to drink. I can only absolve you if you sincerely want to change. My telephone vibrates. I fumble it out and see Eric's office number on the screen. That's odd because Eric never calls me, but I can't answer it now. I don't know. You don't know if you want to stop drinking. I would love to not want to drink, but I want to drink. Is that a clever distinction or an absurdity? The telephone stops vibrating. Are you eating, Father? No. Try not to drink for 2 days. That's a start. Then come back. 2 days I can't. And I cannot absolve you. The first bite was wonderful. The breaking chocolate, the fine prickling taste of the cocoa. But already you can taste that it's too fat and too sweet. That's the way it is with most things. Something Jesus overlooked. Buddha was more alert. Nothing is ever truly sufficient. Everything falls short, and you can't get free. You're eating. Come back in 2 days. Stop eating. I am not eating. In the confessional. In 2 days. If you haven't had a drink, then you should come back. The wood creaks, he leaves. I crumble the empty foil and think about the second bar. It's still in my pocket, and that's where it will stay. I pull it out of my pocket. But I haven't unwrapped it. And even if it were already unwrapped, I wouldn't have bitten into it. Everything is within my power. The mystery that is free will. I can bite into it, I can leave it be. It's up to me. All I have to do for it not to happen is not to do it. The second bar doesn't taste good. I chew quickly and angrily. The second one never tastes good. The telephone vibrates. Eric's office again. It must be important.
We have just a few minutes for a few questions if anyone would like to pose one.
Philosophy. You mentioned philosophy. And so I was curious, who are some of your favorite philosophers, and if how they may have influenced your work. And also during this discussion, a few cultural references came up for me. One was Trilby, where that was the original Svengali, the hypnotist, the old play Trilby, the Findicicle play, which is never done anymore, but it was actually an influence on Phantom of the Opera. And also The Forged Coupon, which was a story by Tolstoy. Could you say also, in addition to philosophy, any particular writers? You mentioned Bolano, who's had an impact on you of late, but in terms of writers, German or American or any other nationality, who've affected your work, either in the past or present, or have inspired you?
Yeah, I will. That's a lot of questions, but I will try to answer them all as well as possible. As far as philosophy is concerned, something that all academic philosophers will despise me for, as a writer, I still reserve for myself the right to love Arthur Schopenhauer. I know in the academe he's not well esteemed anymore, but I think he's just the way he insists on the world being a dream, and in that dream everything being possible. Well, I'm aware of the fact that that's not the right way to sum up his philosophy, but in a way it is. It's just a wonderful philosophy for writers. Also, he is such a good writer. I think he's the best writer of essayistic prose in the German language in the 19th century. Many people would say that's Nietzsche. I think that's for me that's Schopenhauer. So that's still and will always be a strong influence on me. Something that also was a strong influence, especially on when I imagined the works of Arthur Friedland, who is not really a novelist, who's more like a strange, playful essayist, was this very modern field called philosophy of mind. So I was very interested in the very in the extreme materialist view on mind put forward by people like the Churchlands or by Daniel Dennett. That was very interesting to me, and I used some of that in F. I think it's extremely interesting, although I'm not really convinced by it. But it's always really interesting to take an extremely materialist view on a very metaphysical questions. You will always get some very interesting solutions, or not solutions, but some very interesting things out of that. And I think that's what these people in philosophy of mind do these days. Yes, and as for influences in writing, that's of course a big topic. As a writer, you're always influenced by so many things. I think still the biggest influence on me was to discover Vladimir Nabokov in my early 20s. It doesn't seem like a very eccentric or unusual choice, but back then, when I was going to University of Vienna in the middle of the 90s, nobody there was reading Nabokov. So there was the thing we were taught all of us was that there's a very, very strict difference between writing narratively or being experimental. And you couldn't be both. And Nabokov showed me that, of course, you could be both. That there's a whole world of experimental narrative writing. And later, of course, I discovered many other writers, about whose work you can say that. But that moment of discovering Nabokov and reading all of his work and reading it again and again has, I think, might still have formed me as a writer more than anything else.
Could you talk a little bit about how you write, where you write, what the process of writing is like for you when you began writing? Just to give us a little background on where you came from.
I don't have many interesting things to say about the writing process because I don't really have a routine. So it changes. I can't really write in the morning because I'm not a morning person. I really like the early afternoon. Early afternoon is a wonderful time when you still feel there's a lot of day left and you're already awake and alert. And I also like at night like to work at night when things are quiet and you feel like you might be the only person awake. No. I travel a lot. It took me a while to be able to write in New York, because when I came to New York, I had this experience that many people have who come to New York. You feel like there's so much going on. So whenever you're at home, you're like a loser who misses out on so many things. So it took me a while to be able to stay at home in New York. But I think I've learned that now. So I am actually able to be in New York and stay at home and write. But it was a process. It took me a while to get there. And this book took longer than all my other books before, not together, but any one of them, because I really started out with an idea of the brothers, of the characters. So it was the first really character-driven thing I wrote. So I didn't really know what would happen to these people. So I had to find out by writing, and so by having many false starts, going back, changing things. Martin wasn't even a priest when I started. He was doing something else. So I had to. That's one of the things I found out, that when you write a character-driven novel, it brings you many discoveries, but it just takes much more time, which is fine. But so this novel, all in all, it took me, I think, more than 4 years to write, and I had never worked that long before on a single book. But that was also part of the experience. I wanted to write a novel where I didn't know everything, or maybe even where I didn't know much in advance.
How important is the topic of trust or betrayal to you? When I look at these three characters, they all seem to betray at least our expectation of their professions. Like, you can't trust the banker with your money, you can't trust the priest with your God, and you can't trust the artist with his art. Am I just interpreting that? Is that simplistic? Or is that something that's very important to you, or something that you play with?
It's something that enters the story if you write about con men. So I don't actually. I have been asked quite often after I published that book whether I think that you can trust anybody. Because, of course, if you write about 3 con men, it just seems like you can't trust anybody. It's true. And so I can see how you can have that impression. But the funny thing is, one of the things you find out when you write about con men, and also when you research how is it actually done, one of the things you find out is that the business model of being a con man, of being a fraudulent person, of being a forger, it's so successful, so extremely successful, because most people actually tell the truth to most people most of the time. If it weren't like that, then a con man wouldn't have any chance. The one thing a con man does is that he lies where other people tell the truth. So it's actually very easy to be. Let me put it this way. It's surprisingly easy, for example, to if you're a financial advisor, to betray your clients. I talked to a very good financial advisor while I was researching that, and after he relaxed a little bit that I wasn't after him in any way, he said, you know, it is interesting because I put my clients' money on the bank and then I work with that, but they never ask for a statement from the bank. They always actually, it is true. Whatever I would print out, it could all be an invention, what I print out for them. And of course, if they would ask for a statement from the bank, I would give it to them, but they never ask. So actually, my worldview isn't that bleak. I think if people were actually lying to each other all the time, then con men wouldn't be so successful, and then I wouldn't have been able to write a story about them.
I want to thank Daniel Kehlmann. I want to thank Carol Janeway for such a wonderful discussion. We have books for sale, and invite you to certainly purchase one, and thank you all for coming tonight.